I didn't lose my family in an argument. I lost them quietly. Somewhere between being useful and being ignored, I became invisible in my own home. They said I was difficult, outdated, stuck in the past. So I stopped talking. What they didn't know was that while they were planning holidays without me, while they were making decisions for me, I was building something they never thought I could. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't warn anyone. And when the world finally said my name out loud, my family heard it from the news. That's when everything changed. After 43 years of marriage, I believed I had developed a thick enough skin for disappointment. Life teaches you that skill quietly, year by year. But nothing prepared me for the way Alina said my name that Thursday morning, slowly, carefully, as if she were already bracing for impact. "Ruth," she said, folding her hands together on the kitchen table. "I think it's best if you don't come to the lake house this Christmas." For a moment, the room felt tilted. The hum of the refrigerator grew louder, the clock on the wall suddenly obnoxious. I stared at my coffee, watching steam rise, trying to decide if I'd heard her correctly. "Don't come," I asked. "What do you mean, don't come?" She didn't meet my eyes. That was the first cut. "The kids and I talked. We think it might be easier if you stayed home this year." Easier, such a polite word for exclusion. She continued before I could respond, her voice calm, rehearsed. "You've been tense lately, critical. Everyone feels like they're walking on eggshells around you." I let out a short laugh. Critical or just honest? Her sigh was familiar now, the sigh of someone who had already decided I was the problem. "At Thanksgiving, you challenged Daniel about his career choices. At Maya's birthday, you made a comment about her partner's appearance. You don't mean harm, Ruth, but you don't hear yourself anymore." Daniel was 41, constantly chasing the next big idea. Maya was 38, endlessly compassionate, sometimes to her own detriment. I had raised them to think, to question. Apparently, that lesson had expired. "So that's it," I said quietly. "After 4 decades, I'm not welcome at my own family's Christmas." "It's not permanent," Alina said quickly. "Just space, time for things to settle." Space, settle. Words people use when they don't want to admit they're pushing someone aside. That night, I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, replaying years of holidays at the lake house. Snow falling softly, fire crackling, voices overlapping. This year, there would be laughter. Just not with me there. And as the house fell silent, one thought kept returning, sharper each time. They believed this was the end of my relevance. They were wrong. Alina left early the next morning. I woke to an empty side of the bed and a folded note on the counter. "Didn't want to wake you. Coffee's ready. We'll talk later." We wouldn't. The house felt unfamiliar in daylight, like a place staged for someone else's life. Over the years, room by room, it had quietly stopped belonging to me. Furniture replaced without discussion. Walls repainted to suit new moods. Even the rhythm of the space felt altered, as if my presence disrupted it. So I went downstairs. The basement workshop greeted me the way it always had, with the faint smell of sawdust, old metal, and unfinished ideas. Tools lined the walls where I'd placed them years ago. Shelves sagged under notebooks no one had ever opened but me. This room hadn't been redesigned. It hadn't been corrected. It still spoke my language. To my family, this was where I puttered, where time went to disappear. They had no idea. 8 months earlier, at a colleague's retirement dinner, I'd sat beside Hannah Liu, balancing a plate of overcooked chicken while we talked shop for old times' sake. Over dessert, she'd said something casually that stuck with me. "The real problem in construction isn't materials or money," she'd said. "It's translation. Everyone uses different systems, different standards. Half the budget disappears fixing misunderstandings." I'd nodded, because I knew she was right. What Hannah didn't know was that decades ago, during a major transit project, I'd built a coordination framework that solved exactly that problem. It wasn't digital. It wasn't elegant. But it worked. For years. Until it was shelved, replaced by trendier tools that never quite did the same job. That night, I pulled out old binders, yellowed pages, handwritten flowcharts, logic that still held. Then I opened my laptop. While my family joked about me learning computers, I taught myself new languages, ones they assumed were beyond me now. Code, systems modeling, machine learning concepts, not to prove anything. Just to finish something I'd started long ago. By the time winter arrived, I wasn't hiding in the basement anymore. I was building. And sitting there alone, excluded from Christmas, I finally understood the truth they couldn't see yet. They thought I was done. I was only getting started. Once an idea settles into your mind, it doesn't ask permission to grow. It waits. It watches. And then, when the timing is right, it demands attention. After that conversation with Hannah, I tried to let it go. I told myself it was nostalgia talking. A retired engineer clinging to relevance. That's what people expect you to believe once you cross a certain age. But every time I stepped into the workshop, the memory returned. I remembered the transit project from the 90s, the chaos of mismatched drawings, competing contractors, deadlines slipping for reasons no one could clearly explain. I remembered sketching a framework that forced clarity where confusion thrived. No ego, no polish, just structure. It had worked better than anyone expected. And then it had been buried. Technology had advanced, they said. New tools, new software. But standing there decades later, I realized the core problem had never disappeared. It had simply changed its costume. That realization was dangerous. Because once you recognize a problem that large, and know you already hold the bones of the solution, you can't unsee it. So I began translating my old system piece by piece. Paper logic became digital flowcharts. Flowcharts became scripts. Scripts became a platform that allowed systems to speak to each other without human interference. Every day brought frustration and discovery in equal measure. I stayed up late, not because I had to, but because my mind felt awake again. Upstairs, life went on without me. Polite messages, brief check-ins. No one asked what I was doing. That hurt more than I expected. But it also clarified something important. By late autumn, I had a working prototype. Ugly, unimpressive to look at. But when I fed real project data into it, my breath caught. Errors flagged themselves. Delays corrected before they existed. Costs dropped sharply. I checked the numbers twice. They held. Alone in the basement, one thought refused to stay quiet. If this worked here, it could work everywhere. And that meant what I was building wasn't a hobby. It was a turning point. I didn't intend to tell anyone. What I was building felt fragile, like a thought that could disappear if spoken aloud. So I kept it to myself, refining it quietly, testing it late at night when the rest of the house slept. The basement became less a refuge and more a command center, though no one upstairs suspected it. Then, in early December, I ran into Hannah again. It was unplanned. A small cafe near the old office complex, one of those places people visit when they don't want to be recognized. She spotted me first. "Ruth," she said, surprised, "you look busy." I smiled. That obvious. We talked politely at first. Weather, retirement, the safe topics. Then she leaned forward. "So," she asked, "are you still thinking about what we talked about, the coordination problem?" Something in her tone made me hesitate. Not curiosity, respect. "I've been exploring it," I said carefully. Her expression changed instantly. "Exploring how?" I hesitated, then pulled out my laptop. I told myself I'd show her 5 minutes, just enough to satisfy the moment. 5 minutes became 20. She leaned in as I walked her through the logic, the translation layers, the automated error detection, the self-correcting loops. When I finished, she didn't speak right away. She closed the laptop gently. "Ruth," she said slowly, "do you understand what you've built?" "A solution," I said. She shook her head. "It's leverage. This could save companies millions, entire projects." The word echoed louder than it should have. "You can't keep this hidden," she added. "People are looking for exactly this." I thought of my family upstairs, convinced I was fatting. "I have kept it hidden," I said, "until now." Hannah met my eyes. "Let me show this to someone, just one meeting." I stared at my coffee, heart steady, mind racing. For the first time, the door was open, and I had to decide whether to walk through it. The office building was glass and steel, all sharp lines and quiet confidence. I arrived early, standing across the street longer than necessary, watching people move with purpose through the revolving doors. Everyone looked like they belonged. I wasn't sure I did. Hannah met me in the lobby, calm as ever. "They're curious," she said as we rode the elevator up. "That's a good sign." Curiosity hadn't protected me much lately. The conference room held 4 people, 3 men, 1 woman, each with a tablet already open, eyes assessing before I spoke a word. They introduced themselves quickly. Partners, analysts, decision makers. "So," one of them said, leaning back, "you've built a coordination platform." I nodded. "I've built a translation system. Coordination is a side effect." That earned a pause. I opened my laptop and began. No exaggeration, no promises, just data. I showed them how the system identified conflicts before construction began, how it reduced rework, how it spoke fluently across incompatible software. Halfway through, the questions started. Technical, precise, unforgiving. I answered every one. Not because I'd rehearsed, but because I'd lived this industry for 35 years. When I finished, the room was quiet. Finally, the woman at the end of the table spoke. "How long did it take you to build this?" 8 months, I said. "Alone?" "Yes." She exchanged a glance with the others. "Do you understand the scale of what you've created?" I thought of Aliner's careful tone, of being told to stay home. "I understand the problem," I said, "and I know it isn't small." They didn't smile. They didn't need to. "This isn't a pitch," the same woman said finally. "It's an acquisition conversation." My pulse didn't race. It settled. Something in my life had just shifted. I didn't tell my family about the meeting. Not that night, not the next day. I moved through the house quietly, as if sound itself might give me away. Aliner talked about holiday plans. Daniel sent a short message asking if I was doing okay. Maya reacted to something I posted weeks ago. No one asked what I was working on. That should have stung. Instead, it clarified things. The firm followed up quickly. Emails, calls, documents that used careful language but carried undeniable weight. They weren't asking if I wanted to move forward. They were asking how. An acquisition meant choices. Control versus scale. Ownership versus reach. I read every line myself, refusing to hand the responsibility to anyone else. This was my work, my thinking, my years. Late one night, Aliner noticed the papers spread across the dining table. "Is everything okay?" she asked, cautious. "Yes," I said. "I'm just reviewing something." She nodded, unconcerned, and went to bed. That moment stayed with me. The offer came 2 days later. I sat alone in the basement, phone on speaker, listening as the woman from the meeting spoke in a steady, professional tone. She outlined the structure first, then the role they wanted me to play. Then she said the number. I didn't react. Not because it wasn't large, because it was. It felt unreal in the way only truth does when it arrives too suddenly. 7 figures for the initial acquisition. Performance milestones beyond that. A seat at the table, not as a symbol, but as authority. When the call ended, the basement felt very quiet. I expected anger, vindication, a rush of satisfaction. What I felt instead was calm. I thought about Christmas at the lake house, about being told to stay home so things would be easier, about how small my world had been allowed to become without anyone noticing. I signed nothing that night, but I knew the decision had already been made. Whatever happened next, it wouldn't be silent anymore. Signing the papers didn't happen all at once. There were calls with lawyers who spoke in paragraphs instead of sentences. There were documents that arrived in batches, each one heavier than the last. And there was the strange sensation of living 2 lives at the same time. Upstairs, I was still Ruth, the retired engineer with opinions no one asked for. Elena planned Christmas menus. Daniel debated travel schedules. Maya worried about whether the lake would freeze in time. Downstairs, I was finalizing an acquisition. I chose not to tell them, not out of spite, not even out of caution. I stayed quiet because I wanted to understand something first. Would anyone notice a change in me if they didn't know the reason? They didn't. The firm moved quickly. They wanted the announcement timed carefully, aligned with market cycles and year-end reports. Midnight on the 26th, Boxing Day, clean, precise. I agreed. At night, I lay awake beside Elena, listening to her breathe, wondering when we had stopped being curious about each other. She reached for my hand once, half asleep, then turned away. That small gesture hurt more than the silence. Daniel called on Christmas Eve. "Just checking in," he said, cheerful but distracted. "Mom said you're staying back this year." "Yes," I said, "that's right." "You okay with that?" "I'm fine." It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the full truth. Christmas Day passed quietly. I worked in the basement, refining final technical notes the firm had requested. Around noon, I made myself a sandwich, turkey, cranberry sauce, because tradition still mattered, even when people didn't. As the evening settled in, the house felt like a stage set after the actors had left. I poured a glass of water and waited. In a few hours, everything would change. And none of them knew. The call came 12 minutes after midnight. I was sitting in the living room, lights dimmed, the Christmas tree still glowing out of habit more than joy. My phone vibrated once on the table, then again, insistent. "Daniel." I answered before it could ring a 3rd time. "Mom," he said, breathless, "what did you do?" The question was so abrupt it almost made me smile. "What do you mean?" "Your name is everywhere," he said. "The news just sent an alert. It says you sold a construction technology platform for—" He stopped, voice cracking. "For millions." I leaned back in the chair. The moment had arrived exactly as promised. Quiet, precise, unavoidable. "Yes," I said calmly. "That's accurate." There was silence on the line. Then, "How much?" "Enough," I replied, "and more depending on performance." He exhaled sharply. "Is this real?" "It is." The call ended without goodbye. 30 seconds later, Maya called. Then Elena. Then Daniel again. My phone lit up with messages from unknown numbers, former colleagues, distant relatives, reporters who somehow already had my contact information. I didn't answer. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I wanted to hear my own thoughts first. For months, I'd been spoken about as if I were fading, fragile, difficult, irrelevant, And now, without warning, the world had corrected that narrative. I watched the news notifications scroll across my screen, my name spelled perfectly, my work summarized in careful language. I felt no triumph, only clarity. By morning, the house was no longer quiet. Voicemails stacked up, texts piled in. Eleanor's message was the longest. "Why didn't you tell me?" I stared at the screen for a long time before setting the phone down. "Because you never asked. I didn't send it." Some conversations were better had face to face. Eleanor came home that afternoon. She didn't knock, she never had to. But the way she stepped inside, slow, uncertain, told me she already knew this conversation would not go the way she wanted. She stood in the doorway, coat still on. "Is it true?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "all of it." She set her bag down carefully, like sudden movements might break something. "Why didn't you tell me?" I waited before answering, not to punish her, to be honest. "Would you have listened?" Her mouth opened, then closed. The silence between us grew heavy. "That's not fair," she finally said. "Isn't it?" I asked. "When was the last time you asked what I was working on, not out of politeness, out of interest?" She sat on the edge of the chair, eyes fixed on the floor. "I didn't think it was this." "That's the point," I said quietly. "You didn't think it was anything." Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "I thought you were stuck, angry, struggling to let go." "I wasn't stuck," I said. "I was building." The words landed harder than I expected. She wiped at her face. "The kids feel terrible." "I'm sure they do," I replied. "Now." She looked up then, startled. "You think this is about the money?" "No," I said. "I think the money made it visible." We sat there, surrounded by a house that suddenly felt too small for the truth we were circling. "What happens now?" she asked. I thought of the contract, the new office, the team waiting for my input. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But whatever it is, it can't be the same as before." She nodded slowly, like someone finally understanding the cost of what had been ignored. This wasn't a reunion. It was an accounting. And it had only just begun. Daniel and Maya came that evening, together. That alone told me this visit had been planned. They stood in the living room like guests unsure of the rules, coats still on, expressions carefully serious. I didn't offer drinks. We didn't need distractions. Daniel spoke first. "Mom," he said, voice tight, "we owe you an apology." I nodded. "For what?" He swallowed. "For treating you like you didn't matter." Maya stepped forward. "Like your experience was outdated, like your ideas were inconvenient." I waited. Apologies rushed or apologies rehearsed. Daniel continued. "We thought you were just being difficult, that you couldn't adapt anymore." I felt the words land, each one familiar. "I adapted," I said. "You just weren't looking." Maya's eyes filled. "We didn't know you were working on something like that." "That's true," I replied, "but it's not the point." They looked at me, confused. "I didn't need admiration," I said. "I needed respect, before the headlines, before the numbers." Daniel nodded quickly. "We see that now." "Do you?" I asked. "Or do you see the money?" He flinched. "Both," he admitted, "and I hate that it took this to wake us up." That honesty mattered. Maya wiped her face. "Can we fix this?" I thought about Christmases past, about advice dismissed, about being tolerated instead of heard. "Maybe," I said, "but not by pretending nothing happened." Daniel exhaled slowly. "What do you want from us?" I met their eyes. Time, space, and effort that doesn't disappear when this stops being exciting. They nodded, solemn, like people finally understanding the weight of what they were asking for. As they left, the house felt quieter, but not empty. For the first time, I hadn't been talked over. And that mattered more than any apology. The next morning, I woke before the alarm. For years, mornings had felt like something to endure: coffee, routine, silence filled with unspoken tension. That day was different. My phone held messages from the firm, from engineers waiting on decisions only I could make. Somewhere downtown, a team was preparing a space for me, whether my family understood it yet or not. I dressed with intention. The office they'd given me wasn't large. Clean lines, whiteboards already filled with questions. 12 engineers, most of them younger than my children, stood when I entered, not out of obligation but attention. That mattered. We talked for hours: architecture choices, failure points, ethics of automation. They didn't simplify their language for me. They didn't explain things slowly. They assumed competence. I rewarded that assumption. For the first time in years, I wasn't someone's spouse or someone's mother or someone's problem. I was the authority in the room. At lunch, one of the engineers asked, "How long have you been thinking about this system?" I smiled. "Longer than you've been alive." They laughed, not dismissively, with admiration. Back home that evening, the house was still quiet. Alina had left a note saying she was staying with a friend. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt space. I cooked dinner for one and didn't rush through it. I reviewed design notes afterward, refining ideas that had waited decades for this level of attention. That night, lying alone, I realized something unsettling and freeing at the same time. My life had been on pause, waiting for permission I was never going to receive. I had spent years shrinking to make others comfortable. Now I wasn't asking anymore. Whatever happened with my family would matter. But it would no longer define me. For the first time in a long time, I fell asleep thinking not about what I had lost, but about what I was building next. Success doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It arrives quietly, in patterns, in meetings that start on time, in questions that assume intelligence, in people who listen all the way to the end before responding. Over the next several weeks, that consistency reshaped my days. The team stopped double-checking my decisions. They began building on them. Ideas I introduced were debated seriously, not politely acknowledged and ignored. When problems surfaced, they came to me first, not last. That shift was subtle, but it changed everything. One afternoon, I overheard two engineers arguing in the hallway about a design choice I'd made. They weren't questioning whether I understood the system. They were discussing how best to execute my logic. I didn't interrupt. I smiled. At home, things moved more slowly. Alina returned after a few days. We shared space without forcing conversation. No dramatic apologies, no promises, just presence. One evening, she asked, "What are you working on now?" The question caught me off guard. Not because of the words, but because of the tone. "An expansion model," I said. "Predictive maintenance, preventing failures before they happen." She nodded. "That sounds important." It was the first time in years she hadn't followed my answer with advice. Daniel sent a proposal a week later, marketing integration ideas, well-researched, thoughtful. He ended the email with a line that mattered more than the rest. "If you think this is wrong, tell me why." Maya called to ask if she could contribute from her field: community impact, ethics, long-term consequences. Not because she felt obligated, because she was curious. I didn't say yes right away. I watched. Respect, I'd learned, isn't declared. It's demonstrated repeatedly, especially when there's nothing to gain. At the office, the work accelerated. At home, conversations softened, not fixed, not forgiven, but changed. Late one night, reviewing reports, I realized something profound. The world hadn't changed around me. I had. And because of that, everything else was finally catching up. It happened in a meeting I almost declined. A long table, glass walls, executives who had only recently learned how to pronounce my name correctly. The agenda was packed, ambitious, urgent. And then someone said, "We'll need you available at all hours for the next quarter." The room waited. I felt the familiar reflex rise, the instinct to agree, to accommodate, to prove I was worth the space I occupied. I didn't follow it. "I won't be," I said calmly. Heads turned, pens paused. "I'm fully committed to the work," I continued, "but not at the cost of exhaustion. We'll set clear timelines. Emergencies are rare. Planning prevents most of them." Silence stretched. Then someone nodded. Another adjusted the schedule. The meeting moved on. No backlash, no punishment. That's when it clicked. The boundaries I feared would make me expendable were the ones that made me effective. At home, I practiced the same discipline. When Daniel asked if I could review a proposal overnight, I said no and suggested a deadline that respected both of us. When Maya wanted immediate feedback, I asked for time to think. They adjusted. Not because they were afraid of losing access, but because they understood I wasn't negotiating my worth anymore. Alina noticed the change first. "You're different," she said one evening. "I'm clearer," I replied. She considered that. "I think I relied on you being available." "I know," I said. "So did I." That admission mattered. For years, I'd mistaken endurance for love, availability for loyalty, silence for peace. Now I understood something else. Boundaries aren't walls. They're instructions. And once I finally gave them, people learned exactly how to treat me. The changes became noticeable in small ways. I stopped justifying my decisions before anyone asked. I stopped adding extra context to soften my conclusions. I stopped apologizing for clarity. In meetings, I spoke once instead of 3 times. I didn't circle back to reassure anyone. If someone disagreed, we discussed the substance, not my tone. The results surprised me. People listened more. At home, the shift was quieter but just as significant. When Alina questioned a schedule change, I explained it once. When Daniel wanted reassurance, I gave facts instead of comfort. When Maya pushed for immediate alignment, I told her when I'd respond. No defensiveness, no guilt. I realized how much of my energy had gone into managing other people's reactions. Not the work, not the decisions. The reactions. One afternoon, a junior engineer hesitated before presenting a counterpoint to my proposal. "I don't want this to sound like I'm questioning you," she said. "You are," I replied, "and that's the job." Her shoulders relaxed. She spoke freely. The idea improved the model. That moment mattered more than the metrics. Because leadership, I was learning, isn't about being agreeable. It's about being precise. At dinner one night, Alina said, "You don't explain yourself the way you used to." "I don't need to," I said. She studied me for a moment. "I think I liked the old way. It made me feel needed." "I know," I replied gently, "but it made me feel small." The truth sat between us, uncomfortable but honest. Letting go of explanations didn't make me cold. It made me efficient. More importantly, it made me visible, as I was, not as I tried to be understood. For the first time, my words carried weight because they weren't padded. They stood on their own. And so did I. I didn't think about legacy until someone asked me who would replace me. The question came during a strategy session, tossed out casually like a scheduling detail. "If you stepped away tomorrow," one executive said, "who carries this forward?" I paused. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I hadn't named it yet. I'm not building something that depends on me, I said. I'm building something that survives me. That answer changed the room. Over the following weeks, I shifted my focus, not away from the work, but deeper into it. Documentation became as important as design. Mentorship carried the same weight as execution. I began pairing senior engineers with juniors intentionally, not based on comfort, but on contrast. Different thinking styles, different strengths, friction that produced growth instead of silence. At first, it slowed things down. Then it sped everything up. People stopped waiting for permission. Decisions happened closer to the problem. Ideas moved without bottlenecks. That was the point. At home, the change echoed. Maya asked me why I spent so much time reviewing other people's work instead of doing everything myself. Because I don't want to be irreplaceable, I told her. I want to be foundational. She nodded slowly. I don't think I've ever thought about it that way. Daniel started mentoring someone at his firm soon after. He didn't mention me when he told the story, but I heard the influence anyway. Elena watched all of this quietly. One night she said, "You're not proving anything anymore, are you?" "No," I replied. "I already did." The truth was simple. I wasn't chasing recognition. I was building continuity. Something that wouldn't disappear when attention moved on. For the first time, my work wasn't just successful. It was sustainable. And that mattered more than being remembered. The invitation sat unopened on my desk for hours. A keynote request, high visibility, industry-wide attention, the kind of opportunity I used to accept immediately, no questions asked. This time, I waited. Not because I was unsure, but because I was listening to myself. The event conflicted with a milestone review my team had been preparing for weeks. I could have moved it. I could have delegated. Everyone expected me to. I didn't. I declined the invitation with a short, respectful note. No explanation beyond scheduling priorities. No reassurance that I'd be available later. The relief surprised me. That afternoon, I sat with my team as they presented their work, confident, sharp, unafraid to challenge each other. They didn't look to me for approval at every turn. They didn't need to. At one point, someone asked, "Should we wait for your sign-off?" "No," I said. "You already know the answer." They smiled and continued. That moment stayed with me. For years, choosing myself had felt like betrayal of my family, my role, my responsibilities. But watching that room, I understood something clearly. Choosing myself hadn't weakened anything. It had strengthened everything around me. At home that evening, Elena noticed the difference. "You seem lighter," she said. "I made a choice today," I replied. "For work." "For myself." She nodded slowly. No resistance, no argument. That night, I slept deeply. Not because the world was quiet, but because my mind was. I had stopped measuring my worth by how much I gave away. And in doing so, I finally claimed what had always been mine. It happened on a Sunday morning. No agenda, no raised voices, just coffee cooling between us and a silence that no longer felt hostile, only honest. Elena broke it first. "I need to ask you something," she said. I waited. "When did you stop needing us to understand you?" The question was careful, brave. "I didn't stop needing it," I said. "I stopped waiting for it." She absorbed that quietly. "I think I was afraid," she admitted. "If you didn't need us, I didn't know where I fit." I nodded. I wasn't trying to leave. I was trying to arrive. That landed differently. She looked at me then, not with concern or guilt, but curiosity. "What do you need now?" The old version of me, would have rushed to soften the answer. I didn't. Partnership, I said. Not dependence, not permission. She considered it. That means I have to change too. Yes, I replied. It does. The room didn't tense. It opened. Later that day, Daniel called not to update me, not to impress me, but to ask how I was managing the pressure. Maya sent an article she thought I'd enjoy, no commentary attached. Small things. But they mattered. That evening, Alina and I walked around the neighborhood. No problem solving, no retrospectives, just conversation. I don't want the old balance back, she said finally. Neither do I replied. What we were building now wasn't familiar. But it was fair. And for the first time, fairness felt like something we could sustain. The test didn't come with conflict. It arrived disguised as opportunity. A competing firm reached out with an offer that was flattering, aggressive, and deliberately timed. More money, more visibility, a chance to lead something flashy and fast. Months earlier, I would have been tempted. Now I read the message twice and felt nothing. Instead, I looked at my calendar, at the faces of the people I was building with, at the systems already moving without friction. I asked myself a simple question. Does this add, or does it interrupt? I met with my team before responding, not to seek permission, but to measure alignment. We talked openly about risks, incentives, long-term impact. No posturing, no fear. At the end, one engineer said, "We don't need this to matter." She was right. That night, I declined the offer. Not with gratitude, not with apology. With clarity. At home, the decision echoed quietly. Alina didn't ask what I was giving up. She asked what I was protecting. That's new, I said. So are you, she replied. Daniel texted a simple line the next morning. Proud of you. No conditions, no comparison. Maya asked if she could sit in on one of our ethics reviews, not to be involved, just to listen. The test wasn't about ambition. It was about alignment. For years, I had confused momentum with meaning, speed with success, approval with security. This time, I chose differently. And nothing collapsed. The work continued, the relationships held, my sense of self didn't waver. That's when I knew the change was real. Not because things improved, but because they didn't fall apart when I said no. The story doesn't end with applause. It ends on an ordinary morning. I wake before the alarm, not out of anxiety, but habit. Sunlight reaches the kitchen floor. The house is quiet in a way that feels settled, not empty. I make coffee and review notes for a meeting I'm looking forward to, not because it proves anything, but because it matters. At work, decisions move without drama. People disagree without fear. Systems hold. When a problem surfaces, it's addressed early, calmly, without urgency masquerading as importance. That was the goal all along. At home, Alina and I share space without roles attached. We talk. We don't perform understanding, we practice it. The kids check in, not to impress me, not to fix anything, just to connect. Nothing is perfect. But it's honest. And honesty turns out to be lighter than approval ever was. Sometimes I think about the woman I used to be, the one who waited to be chosen, invited, validated. The one who believed patience was the same thing as purpose. I don't judge her. She carried me here. But I don't live there anymore. Now I choose deliberately, I speak once, I rest without guilt, I work with intention, I love without shrinking. The world didn't suddenly become kinder. I became clearer. And clarity has a way of changing everything it touches. If there's a lesson in all of this, it isn't about success or money or recognition. It's about alignment. About becoming someone you don't need to explain, someone you don't need permission to be. This isn't the life I imagined years ago. It's better because it's mine. And that's who I am, even when no one is watching. I used to think success would feel loud. Applause, headlines, vindication. Instead, it felt quiet. A year after the Christmas I spent alone, I sat by the fireplace at the lake house, my laptop balanced on my knees, snow drifting past the window. Upstairs, my family slept. Not perfectly healed, not magically fixed, but listening now, learning. The platform I built had exceeded every projection. Expansion was underway. My work mattered. But that wasn't the victory. The victory was this: I was no longer invisible. Not to them. And finally, not to myself. At 67, I wasn't fatting out.